Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation. Tonight, we are joined by Montgomery College anthropology professor Tara Tetrault and Sugarland Ethnohistory Project Director Suzanne Johnson as they delve into the SEHP Dorsey Archaeology Project excavation of the late 1800s log home of Basil and Nancy Dorsey in Sugarland. Reminder, please remain muted during the presentation. You can send any questions you have throughout in the chat. And as always, there will be an opportunity at the end to unmute for a Q&A. If you enjoyed tonight's presentation, make sure to check out our website and register to join us again next week. Without further ado, Tara and Suzanne, take it away.
Good evening. My name is Suzanne Johnson. I'm the president of the Sugarland Ethnohistory Project. Tara and I are going to share with you what the project's all about and her excavation of a property directly next door to the church. The Sugarland Ethnohistory Project, like I said, we're going to talk about the project, and the museum, which we have right now, is housed in the church. We're going to talk about the excavation. We also have a book called I Have Started for Canaan that we'll do a little bit later. And Tara will tell you much more about the archaeology site report. The Sugarland Ethnohistory Project began in 1995. My cousin, Gwen Reese, who was the president and founder of the organization, passed away this past summer. So I moved in and kept the project going. The two of us had worked together since 2008 and got a lot done with the help of not just the two of us, but lots of other people. Her mission was to make sure that people knew about the Sugarland community, to keep the history alive. And she also has lots of artifacts and documents so that you can learn a lot from this African-American community. Gwen grew up in the community. I also visited there because my grandparents, my maternal roots are in Sugarland in Montgomery County. So that's one of the reasons why I came to join her after I retired from teaching. As I stated before, our mission is to document the genealogy of Sugarland descendants, create an outreach program, and to serve as history and genealogy, a resource for history and genealogy. Gwen and I spent nearly 20 years collecting stories, artifacts, and lots of other things from the Sugarland to help you understand about Sugarland. It was started in 1871. The former enslaved people purchased land from different families to create the community. They had a church, a store, a school, and a post office. And the church, like a lot of other Black communities, was the center of the community. Everything went on in the church. And that building that you will see in a little while was built in 1893, and it looks exactly like that today. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Suzanne, I can't, seems to be stuck. I'm gonna stop share for a minute.
Okay, because I was about where I was so that Dottie can start the video.
Okay.
Yeah, so that'll work.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Thanks, Dottie.
We've got a video they're sharing.
There we go.
My name is Gwen Reese. I'm a fifth-generation descendant of the Sugarland community. It's located a few miles south of Poosville, Maryland. Together with my cousin, Suzanne Johnson, we run the Sugarland Ethnohistory Project. This is the source and purpose of our work. St. Paul Community Church. Our mission is to document the African American community that called Sugarland home for generations. This church as well as our growing collection of stories, artifacts, and documents, help illustrate the African American experience from slavery to the present day. After emancipation in 1864, Sugarland grew into one of the largest Black communities in northwestern Montgomery County. At its height, more than 40 families owned over 200 acres of land here. The households would come together as one big extended family, and they always said if there was a little extra land, they had to grow something on it because their goal was to be self-sufficient. By the beginning of the 20th century, Sugarland had a school, a post office, a community hall, a store, and a town band. And of course, we had our beautiful church, which was built in 1893. It was the cornerstone of the community, and it's where we still meet to preserve and share our history. Today, only a few descendants live nearby, but we still have a strong emotional and spiritual bond to this land. At reunions and Heritage Day events, many members of our big extended family come back to explore and reclaim their past. We have resources to help them rediscover their roots. We also offer tours of the church and cemetery for anyone who wants to learn more about the history here. Recently, we published a book to share the achievements of our foreparents with the world. We're grateful to them, and we honor their legacy of faith and family. No matter who you are or where you're from, we believe the story of Sugarland has the power to teach and inspire. You can learn more about what we do by visiting our website at sugarlandproject.org.
Okay, let me go ahead and share the archaeology PowerPoint. Hopefully. Okay. And I think where I'd like to start is in the historic research for the archaeological site. When Gwen and Suzanne first came to me and said, would you come test this archaeological site? They brought me back into the property next to the church. And so we walked through the woods and they showed me the 4 support stones for this house in the woods. And I was just sort of taken aback because there was no, foundation, walls, fireplace. On the other hand, I'd done a lot of excavating in the past and some prehistoric sites where they have nothing like that. So we did the background research, and the research was on Nancy and Basil Dorsey, since they were the owners of the property, and were able to put the categories their history into 3 separate time periods. From 1874 to roughly 1885, Nancy and Basil were raising their children. Some of their children were a little older, but they had, up until that time, they had young children as well. And the names you can see in front of you: Eliza, John, Mary, Elizabeth, and Margaret. Their middle daughter, Mary, married the local postman, Nathan Johnson, who was the second African-American postman in Montgomery County. And they married in 1881, they had their first son, Joseph. And from 1881 to 1900, Nancy and Basil were grandparents and parents. So that a couple of their children were having grandchildren. And from 1901 to 1909, they were getting on in years. Their children were out of the house. Some of the other data that we were able to find from the archival record were that we placed Basil and Nancy as being born about 1830. Nancy Beckwith was enslaved to Mary Chiswell at the time in Poolsville, but later married Basil. And the couple had 6 children between 1859 and 1868. We know of 5 of them that you can see their names and ages listed in that table below. And I made the table so that you could see how old they were when they moved into the community, but I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. Basil, Luke Hebron, William Beckworth were recruited to work in the Civil War, but on the Confederate side, we also know that Nancy negotiated the property, the first purchase of their Sugarland home, which was right next to the church. So there's an 1874 deed with just her name on it, and a later deed when they paid off the property with both her and her husband's name on it. The Dorseys farmed pigs, chickens. They had a huge garden and an orchard in the back, and they had a lot about 4 acres. So our project focuses on the first 2 acres and trying to excavate and uncover the home and immediate surroundings of the house. That the Dorseys worked on community-wide efforts. They planted with other families. I mean, just like many of the other families in Sugarland, they planted together, they harvested, they got groups together to harvest all the apples and other produce that they produced. And then, as Gwen mentioned, one of the things that I was really taken aback with Sugarland was just to learn how much they got together and created community structures that they needed, a courtroom, a musical band. To me, it just shows so much about what a tight community they had. So what did the Dorsey House archaeological site tell us? What did our research about it tell us? What did it look like? We ran a phase, we did a walkover of the surface area, and then we did a phase 2 testing of the house area. So I put in test units initially in the corners of the house and in the middle. But we, like I had mentioned before, when Gwen and Suzanne took me to the site in the very beginning, we had, they pointed out the 4 foundation stones. Then we found smaller foundation stones in between. So I put in this picture of the National Park Service cabin off to the left, I guess, just to sort of say, well, it looked roughly like this in the sense that there were smaller foundation stones underneath. They told me at this initial meeting, there was no picture of the house. We have no pictures of the Dorseys. So what we had to go on were the interviews from Tillman Lee in 1970, which were wonderful, and the artifacts. So in his interviews, he talks about how the front of the house had 2 bay windows and a sash window, and how the front door was on the side of the house because the front was all taken up with windows. And I love the fact that they had, not just 1 bay, but they had 2. They had 2 rooms downstairs and an attic, but it was for storing things. And they said it was too cold to put a bedroom up there. So we believe that shortly after the house was built, they ended up putting in an addition. But when the addition was put in exactly, we don't know. On the slide in front of you, I'm hoping you can also see the small foundation stone that Suzanne and Gwen had initially showed me. And then when we cleaned off the surface area and gave an approximate measurement of the house. And this was the house only, not the house in the addition. So what did we find? Well, we divided it into looking at units, test units on the east half and the west half. It seemed simpler because on the east half, we had Tillman Lee's interview to go with, where he says that there was no chimney, there was no stove, but there was a stove flue, or rather a clay pipe ascended from the middle of the roof, that there were planked floors across, throughout the house. But we had that one little tidbit of information. And so as we started excavating or putting in test units, we were trying to be mindful of that. And in 2 of the test units on the east side, we were lucky enough to unpack or uncover the picture you see before you of the supports, the stones underneath the house. And then we found, kitchen artifacts, food consumption and serving artifacts, like the glass medicinal bottle on the bottom of your screen, that sort of white colored or ironstone broken flatware or food, curved, bowl or plate. The stoneware jug or stoneware jugs. But in both of the units, we also found these long iron tools that they basically use to stoke the fire, to pull pans out, but they were definitely there for using with the stove. The small agricultural tool was also things we found. We found things that people just come in the house and they leave stuff in the kitchen, much like they do today. And the small piece of wiring metal that you see in that slide was something I just thought was wonderful, because it was one of those old, curtain pieces of wire that holds your curtain that goes around the cabinet. And then we also found in many portions of the house, the ginger bottle that's up in the corner of your slide. Finally, when I excavated the test unit 11, which was pretty much center of the house, I was lucky enough to find the 1 cent piece that you see on the bottom corner of your slide. And that was just really exciting. I don't think I've ever found a coin, but it was neat to me. And we were able to date it between 1859 and 1909, exactly the time period that the Dorseys lived there. And so I thought that was sort of ironic. We go down to the next slide. So the next one on this slide shows artifacts that we found on the west side of the house. Again, we had those corner test units to look at. So we had one in the northwest corner of the house. That's the one that you see in blue on the top of the screen. And the excavators found the clay pipe or kaolin pipe that, we believe was one of those, little clay pipe bowl where they stick on a yard of clay. They were actually 36 inches long. And then the bracelet, they found a marble. And so essentially they were finding things that were about socializing, entertaining, cups and bottles and things like that. Whereas on the other side, we found those, the cups and the bottles and things like you see in the bottom picture, but we also found a lot of buttons and attachments, child-sized buckles and child-sized buttons. And to me, that was just really wonderful find, because recently I'd read somebody's master's thesis or doctoral proposal about how important it is that we start to uncover and name when we're seeing children's things. So this was a great thing to find, I thought. Let me go and So our next slide talks about what did we find as we walked out the back door. And the archaeologist who was excavating this found a wide array of things. You know, it's in part what was left outside, what was, you know, possibly, you know, left for trash outside. But in the excavation were, again, a number of buttons. You can see two sizes of white buttons. And the majority of the buttons that we found were these white buttons that you find on workman, you know, jacket, shirts today. But he also found a really cool 1843 gutta percha button, the black plain one that you see in that picture, in the top picture there. The other black one, I think, is also a gutta percha button. It's just really damaged. And most of the other buttons that we found in the addition were gutta percha, but they were all from different time periods. So this was a button type that people were consistently buying. And the last, one of the last artifacts that I just adored was this small child's ceramic teacup. It's probably you know, it's broken on multiple sides. So maybe we have the base of the teacup bowl. But that was just wonderful, because again, I had just read this dissertation proposal about, you know, it's important that we also talk about the children at a site. And certainly children and grandchildren were an incremental part of the Dorsey's lives. So that was really super. And then the last artifact that I want to mention that they uncovered at the Dorsey, you know, the back door was was found fairly deep. So, you know, either buried there or dropped when they first initially bought built the addition or house. But it, you know, it's a piece of black onyx cameo. When you looked on it, I mean, you can see the front of it here, where there's no evidence of a stone being inlaid in that setting. When you looked around the sides of it, there's no evidence of, you know, you don't see a hole where you would see an attachment or anything like that. If it were a necklace, you know, so if it were, I was expecting to see where's the hole, where's the broken attachment, something like that. And there was nothing. So it suggests that it may have just been, you know, put there intentionally, buried there. It suggests much more about belief systems than it does for an artifact, you know, for beautification. So that was, you know, pretty exciting. And in the 19th century, African-American communities, Black onyx has been considered an artifact to protect and absorb negative energy. Like hoodoo, it gives strength and power. It is therefore an effective way to protect and heal. So it could have been for a multiple, you know, those types of purposes. In 1874, though, if you think about Nancy and Basil, they had just bought their first home. They were new to freedom. And the fact that they invested all the money that they had in their land and building this house meant that they anticipated raising crops, but they also took a big chance. The actions the Dorseys took showed that they were charting a new path for their children and grandchildren, and that they had hope for the future. I think it's reasonable to assume then that the Dorseys would do everything that they could to ensure their family would prosper. And I guess that's what I see in the cameo. A couple of other slides just to go through what we found in the addition. The addition was built so that they could have a kitchen and a bedroom. So the question was, is that what we found in the addition? In front of you are the is a collection of artifacts found in test units 14 and 15, what we believe to be the kitchen. The 1888 overall or coverall attachments. We found the bone inlay that you can see here. I don't know if you can see that it has a green inlay, which I thought was really interesting. It reminded me of the green and white ceramics that were really popular at that time. These were some of the first mass-produced ceramics. But the little brass cutlery piece next to it, I was even thrilled at finding the wire nail, not because wire nails are so fascinating, but it was the only one we found. So I thought, well, maybe that's more of a comment on a repair than it is, manufacturing the house. And it made me think about, well, what is it that happened? What broke? And then the other things that were found in those units that were particularly important were the amount of faunal animal bone that was butchered, like you can see in the other picture, the steaks and the knife or fork that you see in the middle. That was pretty fascinating. As for the little pin in the corner, the little flag that says ASA. We have no idea what ASA is. I have looked and looked and looked. Other people have looked. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, I'm all ears. So I just thought I'd make that plea. Let me show you the last slide. Oh, the picture comes out much better on the slide. I'm pleased. So the last slide shows the excavating the kitchen and a little bit of the bedroom, and the really pretty lily patterned gutta percha button. And this patterned, the way it's patterned with detail design and the backing, the detailed background in the design is an 1890 change in the style of gutta percha buttons. I thought that was pretty interesting, given the time frame that the family lived there. But I have to say too that you're looking at a picture of the archaeologists and volunteers who are helping on the site, and it just reminds me that we would not have gotten this done without our volunteers, for which I'm gratefully appreciate their time and attention to this project. It was a lot of fun. But in conclusion, and I'm just checking my time. Concluding points about the site before I go on to some of the books that we have. The Dorsey site, the overwhelming theme that I see throughout doing the research and the excavation and the things that we found in the excavation, rings that the Dorsey site is about hope and change. Community archaeology projects like the Dorsey site allow us to understand more about how Sugarland residents built their farm and built their community, coordinated together, did things, and gained things that they would not have otherwise done if they didn't have each other. We learned details that defy modern stereotypes, like the fact that women owned land back in 1870s and 1860s and the 1880s, and weren't told that they couldn't own land. In other parts of the country, women were being challenged and told they couldn't own land, even though it was on the books in 1830. Weaving archaeology, ethnohistory, interviews, and material culture together, I feel that we've gotten a stronger interpretation of the past. And we hope that by publishing the book, that the Sugarland Ethnohistory Project published in 2020, and the K-12 teaching module that we published from this excavation, along with the online exhibits, that generations will learn about the Dorsey family or Sugarland, and give them a new perspective as to what African-American families achieved and contributed to society. Suzanne, do you want to talk a minute or two about the book?
Okay, excuse me. Back in 2020, well, 2 years before that, a gentleman came to Gwen and I and offered to help. His name was Jeff Sipek. And as soon as he asked us how we wanted him to help us, Gwen and I almost said in tandem, we need a book. And he was off and running. We would bring him things, he would ask questions, and the product of that is the book that you see in front of you. It's called I Have Started for Canaan, and it's the story of the African-American town of Sugarland. Jeff did a lot of research. I learned things from this book, and I've been working with Gwen for, like I said, close to 20 years. It's for sale on our website if you'd like to have one. It's a wonderful resource if you want to learn about an African-American community after slavery and during Reconstruction. So please feel free to check out our website if you would like to have a copy of those. I have to do a little commercial because I'm proud of the fact that the picture that's on the book happens to be my family, all except the gentleman pulling the water out of the well for the children. The children are my mom, aunts, uncles, and cousins. So I had to do a little commercial for that. That picture is also in the African American Museum downtown. But the book has been a wonderful resource. It's given people a lot of information about the community, and we've got a lot of interest in learning more about it. We're presently in the process of reorganizing since the passing of Gwen, and we will let you know on our website and our Facebook page when tours might be available to if you're interested in coming by to see and learn more about Sugarland.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so, you know, as I mentioned, we did the excavation, and out of the excavation, we created a virtual archaeology exhibit, just, you know, giving some of the highlights from the history and archaeology that we, you know, the material culture. I also worked with another company to create a virtual tour. So I showed them what we had, and they came out a number of times and took pictures. And so they, you know, the virtual tour you can go through and see different parts of the site, and you can see the site once it was excavated, what it looked like. The book has an introduction to archaeology, and I created one of these once before for teachers, and they just loved it. They used it for years. So when we opened the idea of doing an excavation for Sugarland, I knew I wanted to make another teaching module. And so I also wrote an introduction to archaeology and preservation. And then we have one chapter that talks about the Dorsey history and some Sugarland history. And then it goes through the archaeology and what happened, what did we find in the house, in the Dorsey house. And then each one of these, there's a section that covers like a review of what happened, but then aside from doing some reading, they also the kids get exercises to do. So if you're a K-12 teacher out there and you wanted to teach archaeology, this is an easy way to do this, a successful way of teaching it without taking the kids on an excavation, which is just too complicated. The last exercise, I will tell you, is much more preservation bent. It is asking students to work in groups and take sides on an issue. Should the Dorsey site be preserved or something like that? I always like to add a little, debate at the end. I put the name of another module that I created many years ago that was the Maynard Burgess House module. It's in Annapolis, but it is, it was my first try out for doing these teaching modules. And I had it, reviewed by teachers and everything. So it's, but its success gave me a lot of encouragement for creating the Dorsey module. So I'm happy to pass the baton back and you guys can do questions and answers. So let me do stop share. Oh, I would be remiss if I didn't remember to do this. I am sorry. But I can't thank the people who volunteered. We had teachers from the Environmental Ed group. We had Archaeological Society of Maryland volunteers. I had interns from students of mine who came back after taking my class years ago, came back to help. We had other anthropologists come out and archaeologists and historians. And, it was just a wonderful group of people. And some of the neighbors would come out and, Ann Allnut helped a lot with designing a new flyer for us. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. I certainly couldn't have done a lot of the details in history if I hadn't had Jeff's help. So thank you, thank you. And I'm woefully trying to find, there it is, stop share.
We can open up for questions at this time. Feel free to either unmute or put them in the chat. I'd also like to point out a couple things. I put a link to, I'm on my way to Canaan. I put a link to I have started for Canaan in the chat. And I also put a link to the Sugarland Ethno History Project website. So if you're interested in checking those out, there's a link to both in the chat. And Maria also pointed out that one of our auction items, which is going live tomorrow morning, is a private tour for up to 10 people of Sugarland. So if you're interested in that, definitely check that out because there's a lot of cool history there. I see a question that says, how did the community get named Sugarland? What was the significance of the name?
Okay. There's two versions of the story. The first version is they named it Sugarland because the women that lived there were so sweet. The real reason is the fact that there are sugar maple trees all over that area, and it's been Sugarland ever since 17 something. We've got documentation, and I think it even runs into parts of Virginia because the river is not too far, and where White's Ferry is, and that whole area, I believe, was called Sugarland at one point.
I also see a question asking about the significance of the buttons, the brand you were saying, Gouda Percha.
Oh, yeah, they were a popular button, very, you'd see them on a wide array of garments. So I took them to be something that were relatively easy to get, inexpensive. They're like a plastic button. But really until unpacking this site, I hadn't seen so much variety, which forced me to take a real look at, well, what is the history here? Which was actually a lot of fun. And it was fun to learn about the different designs and when they came into being.
Feel free to unmute and ask a question or send any more questions you have in the chat.
Suzanne, when do you think that you'll open up for tours? Like if we wanted to get a group together?
Probably not much before May. I'm hoping that we'll be able to at least start them by that time. We've had some work done on the church because since it's over 125 years old, we needed work done to the chimneys and we're getting the roof replaced. So a lot of the physical things we wanted to make sure we had gotten in place and squared away before we started the tours, but hopefully by at least May.
Great.
Mhm.
I was curious, are there any family cemetery plots where the homesteads used to reside, or were most folks buried there in the church cemetery?
I'm glad you brought that up. I forgot to mention that there are part of the acreage where the church is, that whole back area is the cemetery. We've documented that with the help of Glenn Wallace and Eileen McGuckian and Ann Allnut. And we have found and are still finding people buried there. And we're up over 300 now,
Wow.
something like that. I don't know where they are, but they're there. But that's been a fun part for me, finding out, who's there. But yeah, I don't believe anyone had cemetery burials on their properties, because everybody, was buried at the church, because there are family plots there now that are still being used. So if you're a member of if you can document that your family was a member of the community and there is a space, you still will, be able to be buried there. But thank you for that question.
Oh, you're welcome.
Mhm.
Tara,
Yeah,
hi. I guess I was slow being able to come and participate in tonight's presentation. I didn't hear, how was it that you were first contacted to come out here?
oh, sure. So I have been teaching part-time at Montgomery College I am in my 20th year. But my boss at the time had just came to me and said, Gwen Reese and Suzanne Johnson had come to her asking that, would she be willing to come out and do the excavation? And she really couldn't for various reasons, and had, passed my name on. And I, prior to coming here, I had done a lot of work on just looking at the accounts of the early African-American communities. And then trying to go through the archaeological reports and saying, well, here's another one that, it's deep embedded in the some archaeology report, but trying to get a better sense of combining history and archaeology. So that might have been one of the reasons, I guess, that Cindy thought of me.
Can I ask, do you have any future plans to do any of the other sites? We have, 5 or 6 historic Black communities. I know one is called Jerusalem, across from the old Rosenwald School. That's at the beauty spot on Jerusalem Road. Are you aware of that area?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't talked about doing any. I there's a couple that I'm very interested in the sense that, anything I could do to help them with their preservation or archaeology if it's necessary. But I know that for the Dorsey property, we've only just excavated the house and addition, and I wanted to do something small enough that it could be successful, because this being a COVID year, I wasn't sure how much we were going to get done. And next year, or this coming year, we'll be excavating or testing some of the outbuildings, because that could tell us a lot on diet or maybe what they sold. There's a huge garden, which I don't have access to, but if I did, we would be trying to find somebody who knows botanical.
What about the store? Do we know where it was on the property?
No, I don't believe anyone knew where the store was. It was approximately, it was somewhere in the area of the church. The church and the school were maybe a quarter of a mile from each other, if that far. As far as the store and the post office, we're not exactly sure where that is. That's one of the another piece that we want to research. But we've got information as to who owned it, but exactly physically where it was, we're not sure.
That could be really fascinating,
Oh,
because we
yeah.
would
Yeah.
dairy bottles from all over the county.
Yeah, right? Who knows what you could find there?
If I might say something, there is a house that's about 3/4 of a mile down Sugarland Road. My goddaughter lives right across the street with the farm, and the house itself, they believe that it was the store itself.
Oh,
Oh,
but it was recently purchased about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and they're doing a lot of renovations. But when I was in that house, it was a very tiny, confined building, and they've added on to the back and to the side.
Okay, I know that they're also just past the end of the cemetery, there's a house in the spot where the school used to be.
Right.
And we had hi Glenn, how are you?
Hello, beautiful.
So, yeah, if it wasn't for Glenn mapping that cemetery, that was a fascinating experience, I tell you, but
It was.
that helped a lot. That was fun. That was fun.
So for places like the store and the post office where you don't know where it is because of a physical location, did you hear about them just from verbal pass it down or from like written documents that it's referred to?
Some of both. Some of both, because like I said, with Nathan Johnson being the postman, I think there's even a mailbox or something. He used to gather the mail. Poolsville would bring the mail to him for the Sugarland people. He would pass all of the mail out. If they had anything to go, he would collect it all and with the stamps and everything and have it ready for the Poolsville people to come and pick up. So I believe there's a mailbox somewhere, but yeah, there's documentation on him and on Isaac Bell, who also owned the store. So we do have some documentation, physical documentation. But as far as exactly where the buildings are now that Glenn mentioned what he did, we may have to try to investigate that part too.
I also see a question in the chat that says, is the church and Dorsey property held in any historic trust designation to protect it going forward?
Yes, we are a historic property for the Maryland Historical Trust. And the church and the Dorsey property are also part of the Sugarland Ethno History Project. So yes, we're covered.
And Suzanne, was it Gwen's sister who spoke at the funeral? I attended the memorial service that we had on the grounds, and I think it was her sister who spoke.
Her sister was there. I'm trying to remember if Gail spoke or not, but yeah, she's the only one left now.
Is she involved with
she's not physically because of health issues, but her son has been absolutely wonderful.
Oh, great.
Just jumping and helping things. He's the Mr. Fix-It. So anything that needed to be fixed around the church, he's probably already gotten it done since July. But yeah, Gail's son and lots of other relatives who have grown up visiting Gwen and learning about the project have really jumped in, and that's basically what's keeping the project going. There have really been a wealth of information. Everybody has expertise in different kinds of things, so it's all working out, very, very, very well. I'm really happy. And Gwen's probably up there dancing too, so we're good.
Yeah. It was a beautiful service.
Yeah, it was.
Is there anywhere where some of the excavated items will be displayed?
Yes, we plan on having a showcase to put the artifacts that Tara showed you today and other things. She just scratched the surface. You have no idea what they have taken out of those spaces already. But yeah, we do plan on, once we get, like I said, things opened up again and organized again, we're going to have a display case, especially for the excavated artifacts.
What are some more of the artifacts which have been excavated aside from what we saw today?
Well, let's see, there's quite a bit of the ginger bottles seem to be around. There's quite a few bottles that I could take a closer look at. And, because there's quite a few medicinal bottles. Remember, people were creating their own home remedies and things of that nature. And, there's a lot of the hardware that, one of the things we do have. We don't have the wood floors, we don't have the walls, but we have the nails. And quite a bit of fauna. So that could tell us a little bit more about diet, maybe.
And Suzanne, what about the 1,000+ artifacts that you and Gwen had collected over time? Are those going to be on display as well?
Yeah, they're all in the church now. If you watch the video, as they did a kind of a zoom around the building, you can see we've got it all set up. Mhm.
Great. And that's going to be part of that tour.
Oh, yeah.
That
Yeah.
Melissa was saying. That's great.
Do we have any more questions? Feel free to either put them in the chat or unmute and ask them. I'm a little bit curious, just I guess this might be more of an archaeology question, but what the purpose is of referring to where the artifacts were found by this was like in the northwest corner, this was facing west. Like, what does that do in terms of helping the project stay organized?
Well, I guess it may be more for me. But certainly the east half of the house was kitchen. This was their big space, they're socializing, cooking, whatever. But I guess to me, it's, when I'm looking at different corners of the house and the assemblages are a little bit different. So, it's really trying to piece together whether the room in the southwest corner seemed more like a bedroom. Was it always used as a bedroom? No, it was, these are multi-uses. There's multiple uses as the day goes by. It's a workspace during the day, but also a place to sleep. We found one bed spring, but so did they have a bed, or were they using, like many people did in the very beginning, just quilts and things like that to create a bed? It's hard to tell because they took everything, all of the furniture and whatnot, belongings, but then also all of the house. And so we just have a little bit of what they actually had in their house, right? So I don't know if I completely answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
So I noticed too that Glenn had left a map of, what's the map of again?
That's the location across the street from my goddaughter's house that they believed was the store.
Okay, cool.
I think that's one of the coolest part of some of these local history presentations is I find that some of the people who join even have lots to offer just in what they have heard around.
And I'm from New Jersey.
Glenn, did you find time to put the cemetery mapping on Find a Grave?
Yes, it is there. The map itself is not. I don't think we put the final map on there. But if you go visit the church, it's in the museum part of it. You'll see a big pull up of it. Very detailed. One of the better projects of that cemetery was that some guy randomly stopped by with GPR equipment and did the entire property, put flags where he hit unknown or unmarked graves. And then they came back. I helped Gwen and Suzanne with a program to put cobblestones on those marked, or on those graves, to give them a marking of something. We don't know who's buried there, but yeah, that cemetery was a great project.
Yeah, that was fun. And Glenn and his group did an overall map, and then Anne, she went back and she's got it detailed as to spaces and who's where, and yeah, it's amazing.
Well, if we have no further questions, I hope you all enjoyed tonight's presentation as much as I did and learned something new. As always, if you think of questions later, you can email us at info@poolesvilleseniors.org and I can pass them on for you. If you'd like to unmute or turn on your camera now to say goodbye, now's the time. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, please leave a like and a comment. We'd like to thank Tara and Suzanne for this presentation, as well as our ongoing sponsors and contributors that help us keep our programs going, because we love putting them on for you. If you enjoyed tonight's program, please consider joining us for more upcoming events. We'll be back this time next week with Kenny Scholl's Historic Properties Lecture for February. As always, you can check out poolesvilleseniors.org for more info and registration. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
For having us.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Suzanne and
much.
Tara.
Yeah, this was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having
Thank you,
us.
everyone.
Awesome.
All righty.